The stars had always been silent until the day they spoke back. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2247, when every radio telescope on Earth picked up the same signal. The message was clear and deliberate, repeating in mathematical sequences that no natural phenomenon could produce. Humanity had spent centuries searching for intelligent life, and now that life had found them first. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Liberty, watching the massive alien ships materialize at the edge of the solar system. There were 7 of them, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They moved with graceful precision, holding position just beyond Neptune's orbit. Jake had spent 15 years in space, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. His hands gripped the command rail as he tried to steady his breathing. Dr. Lisa Warren worked frantically at her console, analyzing every scrap of data the sensors could gather. She was humanity's leading xenobiologist, though until today that title had been purely theoretical. Her dark hair fell across her face as she leaned closer to her screens, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. The alien vessels were broadcasting on multiple frequencies, and the translation algorithms were slowly making sense of the patterns. They call themselves the Galactic Union. Lisa's voice trembled as she read the decoded message aloud. They represent 17 different species. They're here to welcome us into galactic society. The mood in the command center shifted from terror to cautious excitement. Jake ordered his crew to respond with friendship protocols, broadcasting mathematical greetings and images of Earth. Within an hour, the aliens replied with an invitation. They wanted to meet face to face, to discuss humanity's future among the stars. 3 days later, Ambassador Chen Wei arrived at the newly established meeting point on the moon. He was a career diplomat who had negotiated treaties between Earth's nations for 30 years, but those experiences seemed trivial now. He wore his formal diplomatic robes and carried the hopes of 8 billion people on his shoulders. Jake and Lisa accompanied him, representing military and scientific interest respectively. The alien delegation arrived in a small shuttle that seemed to bend light around itself. When the airlock opened, humanity got its first look at the Galactic Union. The lead representative was a creature called Vrix, standing nearly 8 feet tall with a body that resembled a mantis but moved with unsettling fluidity. His compound eyes reflected the station lights in rainbow patterns, and his voice came through a translation device that hung around what might have been his neck. Greetings to the humans of Earth. Vrix's translated words sounded almost friendly, though his alien features made reading emotion impossible. We have watched your species for some time. You have reached the threshold of interstellar capability, and so we extend to you the hand of friendship. Chen Wei bowed respectfully and welcomed the aliens to humanity's home. He asked the questions everyone on Earth wanted answered. Why had they waited until now? What did the Galactic Union want from humanity? And most importantly, what would this friendship cost? Vrix explained that the Union had rules. They only contacted species that had achieved certain technological milestones, ensuring they were ready for galactic society. As for cost, he assured them the terms were generous. Humanity would gain access to technologies that would cure diseases, extend lifespans, and allow faster-than-light travel. They would join a community of peaceful species who traded freely and resolved conflicts through dialogue. All they asked in return was cooperation. Lisa felt her stomach tighten as Vrix outlined the basic framework. The Union would provide technical advisors to help humanity integrate their systems. Earth would open its databases to Union oversight to ensure compliance with galactic law. Human military forces would be reduced and repurposed for purely defensive roles under Union guidance. It all sounded reasonable when Vrix explained it, but something in his tone suggested these were not really requests. Over the following weeks, human negotiators worked to understand the full scope of the treaty. Chen Wei led the discussions, carefully reviewing each provision with legal experts and advisors. The agreement was hundreds of pages long, filled with clauses about resource allocation, population management, and technological sharing. Some provisions seemed odd. Why did the Union need quotas on human birth rates? Why were certain areas of research restricted? Why did humanity have to sell raw materials at prices the Union set? When Chen Wei raised these concerns, Vrix dismissed them with what seemed like impatience. These are standard terms that all member species accept. The Union has maintained peace for 10,000 years through these protocols. Surely humanity does not believe. It knows better than civilizations that mastered space travel. Before your ancestors discovered fire, Jake Morrison attended several of these meetings and grew increasingly uncomfortable. He had commanded ships in tense situations, and he recognized a power imbalance when he saw one. The aliens spoke of friendship and cooperation, but their body language suggested something closer to tolerance. They treated human questions like a parent addressing a child's silly concerns. Lisa spent her time studying everything the Union shared about their member species. She discovered troubling patterns in the data. Several species that joined the Union 1,000 years ago now held minimal positions in galactic affairs. Their populations had stabilized at levels far below their historical peaks. Their contributions to Union science and culture had gradually diminished. When she asked Vrix about this, he explained that these species had simply found their appropriate roles in galactic society. Some are naturally suited to leadership while others excel at support functions, he said, with what might have been a smile. Back on Earth, the debate raged. Some leaders argued for immediate acceptance, eager to gain alien technology and afraid of being left behind. Others counseled caution, warning that the treaty terms seemed designed to limit human independence. The vote in the United Council was scheduled for July, giving humanity 4 months to make the most important decision in its history. Jake Morrison spent those months reviewing everything humanity knew about the Union. He read Lisa's reports on the subordinate species. He studied the economic provisions that would give the Union control over Earth's resource exports. He examined the military clauses that would prevent humanity from maintaining a true defense force. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion, but it was a conclusion no one wanted to face. On the night before the vote, Jake met with Chen Wei in private. The ambassador looked exhausted, his face lined with stress. He knew what the treaty really meant, but he also knew the alternatives. If we refuse, what happens? Chen Wei asked quietly. Do they leave us alone, or do they make us join by force? Jake had no answer. Neither did anyone else. That was the terrible genius of the Union's approach. They never threatened. They never showed their weapons or spoke of consequences. They simply made an offer and waited, letting humanity's own fear and desire do the work. The vote came the next day. The United Council chambers were packed with representatives from every nation. Chen Wei delivered a speech about humanity's future, about the opportunities and challenges ahead. He spoke of hope and cooperation, of humanity taking its place among the stars. When the vote was called, the result was decisive. Humanity would join the Galactic Union. Vrix received the news with what humans interpreted as satisfaction. A wise choice, he told the assembled delegates. You will not regret this decision. Your species will prosper under Union guidance. Lisa Warren watched the celebration that followed and felt no joy. She had spent the past 4 months studying galactic history, and she understood what humanity had just agreed to. They had not joined a partnership of equals. They had accepted terms of surrender dressed in diplomatic language. The Union had conquered humanity without firing a single shot. Jake Morrison stood at a window overlooking Earth, watching the alien ships move into orbit. They would begin their integration procedures immediately, establishing Union facilities on Earth and its colonies. Human governments would gradually cede authority to Union administrators. The process would take years, but the outcome was already determined. Humanity had tried peace. They had chosen cooperation over conflict, negotiation over resistance. They believed they were making a rational choice, securing their future through diplomacy. But as the alien ships cast shadows across the planet below, Jake wondered if they had just traded their freedom for the illusion of safety. The Galactic Union promised prosperity and protection, but the price was written in fine print that most humans would never read. The occupation had begun, though nobody called it that. They called it integration, cooperation, progress. The words were different, but Jake feared the result would be the same. Humanity had just learned the oldest lesson in galactic politics. When a stronger power offers friendship on its own terms, that friendship looks a lot like servitude. 5 years had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Union, and the promise of prosperity had turned hollow. Commander Danny Pierce stood in the observation deck of the Mars colony, watching Union transport ships load cargo containers filled with rare minerals. The ships arrived empty and left full, taking resources that human miners had extracted from the red soil. In return, the colony received payment that barely covered operational costs. Danny had served in the old Earth military before the Union mandated its dissolution. Now he commanded a security detail that existed only to maintain order among human workers. His uniform was different, his authority diminished, but his eyes still saw clearly. The Union was stripping Mars of everything valuable, while giving back almost nothing. The mining crew had been complaining for weeks. They worked 12-hour shifts in dangerous conditions while Union overseers collected premium wages for watching them work. When the miners requested better safety equipment, the Union administrators denied the request, citing budget constraints. When they asked for wage increases to match the rising cost of living, they were told that compensation rates were set by Union economic policy and could not be changed. Yesterday, 3 miners had died when a tunnel collapsed. The Union safety inspector ruled it an accident caused by human error, despite evidence that the support structures were inadequate. No one would be held responsible. No compensation would be paid beyond the minimum required by Union law. The miners had finally had enough. Danny watched as 200 workers gathered in the main plaza, holding signs and chanting demands for fair treatment. It was a peaceful protest, orderly and quiet by human standards. The miners simply wanted someone to listen to their grievances. They had followed every proper channel, filed every required form, and received no response. This was their last resort. The Union enforcers arrived within 30 minutes. They were Kryn soldiers, reptilian beings who served as the Union's police force across dozens of worlds. Their armor was black and intimidating, designed to inspire fear. Their weapons were set to stun, but everyone knew they could be switched to lethal force with a simple command. The lead enforcer, a Kryn captain named Scar, activated his translation device and addressed the crowd. "This gathering is unauthorized. Disperse immediately or face consequences." His voice was cold and mechanical, stripped of any emotion. The miners stood their ground. They had broken no laws. They had the right to assemble peacefully under Union regulations. A young miner named Ben Carter stepped forward, holding his hands up to show he was unarmed. He tried to explain that they just wanted to talk to someone in authority, to have their concerns heard. Scar gave no warning. He raised his weapon and fired directly at Ben. The stun blast hit the young man in the chest, dropping him instantly. The crowd gasped and began to back away, but the enforcers moved forward, firing into the group. Miners fell, their bodies convulsing from the electrical charges. Those who tried to run were shot in the back. Those who raised their hands in surrender were shot anyway. Danny watched in horror from his position above the plaza. His security team looked to him for orders, but what could he do? His weapons were locked in an armory controlled by Union systems. His authority extended only as far as the Union allowed. He activated his communicator and called for medical assistance, then rushed down to the plaza. By the time he arrived, the enforcers were dragging unconscious miners into detention vehicles. 47 people lay stunned on the ground. 3 more had been trampled in the panic, their injuries severe. Ben Carter was still breathing, but his heartbeat was irregular from the stun blast. Danny confronted Scar directly. These people were peaceful. They were unarmed. You had no right to attack them. The Kryn captain looked at him with reptilian indifference. They violated assembly protocols. They disrupted mining operations. We responded appropriately. His tone suggested the matter was closed. Danny filed an official complaint through proper Union channels. He documented everything with video evidence and witness statements. He sent the report to Union headquarters, to Earth's liaison office, and to every oversight committee he could find. Then he waited for a response that he knew would never come. On Earth, Dr. Lisa Warren had made a discovery that explained everything Danny was experiencing. She worked at a Union research facility in Geneva, processing data from archaeological surveys of other member species' homeworlds. The work was supposed to be routine, but Lisa had noticed disturbing patterns in the historical records. She found evidence of 12 different species that had joined the Union under circumstances similar to humanity. Each one had been promised prosperity and advancement. Each one had signed treaties that seemed reasonable on the surface, and each one had been systematically exploited over the following decades. The pattern was consistent and deliberate. The Union would identify resource-rich worlds with intelligent species that had just achieved space travel. They would offer membership with generous-sounding terms. Once the treaty was signed, Union companies would move in and take control of major industries. Local populations would be employed at minimal wages while the profits flowed to Union core worlds. Any species that protested was quietly suppressed. Lisa discovered that 2 of these species had tried to resist. The Talvek had attempted to renegotiate their treaty after 20 years of exploitation. The Union's response was swift and brutal. Economic sanctions were imposed, cutting the Talvek off from galactic trade. When that did not work, Union forces blockaded their system. Within a year, the Talvek government collapsed and was replaced by Union-friendly administrators. The species now existed as second-class citizens in their own system. The other species, the Minari, had gone further. They had attempted to withdraw from the Union entirely, declaring independence and reclaiming their resources. The Union had labeled them rebels and launched a military operation to restore order. The campaign lasted 3 months and ended with the Minari homeworld under occupation. Official records listed the conflict as a police action to prevent civil unrest. Lisa copied everything she found onto encrypted storage devices. She knew this information was dangerous, but humanity needed to know the truth. The Union was not a peaceful coalition of equals. It was an empire that had perfected the art of conquest through contracts instead of warfare. Getting the data back to Earth was risky. Union security monitored all communications from their facilities. Lisa could not simply send an email or make a call. She needed to physically carry the information out, which meant she needed a reason to travel. She requested leave to visit her family in California, a routine request that was approved without question. She packed the storage devices in her luggage, hidden inside everyday items that scanners would ignore. Her hands shook as she passed through security checkpoints, but no alarm sounded. 3 days later, she was sitting in her childhood home, uploading the files to secure servers maintained by human resistance groups. Those resistance groups had been growing quietly since the Union's arrival. Colonel Gary Hayes had seen this coming from the beginning. He had watched the treaty negotiations and understood that humanity was being maneuvered into submission. When the United Council voted to join the Union, Gary had refused to celebrate. He had used his military contacts to organize cells of former soldiers and concerned citizens. They met in secret, communicated through encrypted channels, and prepared for the day when peaceful resistance would no longer be enough. Gary believed that day was coming soon. His daughter Emma disagreed completely. She was a xenobiologist like Lisa, and she still believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. Emma argued that violence would only justify Union crackdown and make things worse for humanity. She attended diplomatic conferences, wrote papers on cross-species cooperation, and advocated for reform through proper channels. The tension between father and daughter reflected humanity's larger divide. Some people accepted Union authority as the price of galactic membership. Others chafed under restrictions but believed change could come through negotiation. And a growing number, like Gary and his resistance network, prepared for armed conflict. The breaking point came on a cold morning in November. The human colony on Europa had been farming algae in the moon's subsurface ocean, developing food production systems that could sustain millions. The operation was successful and profitable, providing both food and income for the colony's 3,000 residents. Union inspectors arrived without warning, claiming the colony violated settlement density regulations that no one had known existed. They ordered an immediate evacuation. The colonists protested, asking for time to harvest their crops and dismantle their equipment. The Union denied the request. When the colonists refused to leave immediately, Union forces sealed the colony domes and cut off power. The life support systems failed within hours. Emergency broadcasts reached Earth too late. By the time rescue ships arrived, everyone in the colony was dead. 3,000 men, women, and children suffocated because they had dared to question Union authority. The Union's official statement called it a tragic accident resulting from colonial non-compliance with safety regulations. They offered no apology, no compensation, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. They simply filed their report and moved on. Danny Pierce watched the news from Mars and felt something break inside him. He had filed his complaint about the mining protest months ago and received no response. Now thousands were He and the Union called it an accident. He understood finally that the system was not broken. It was designed exactly as intended. Lisa Warren sat in her apartment, her stolen data now spread across human networks, and realized her evidence meant nothing if people were not willing to act on it. Emma Hayes attended another diplomatic conference and watched Union representatives dismiss human concerns with barely concealed contempt, and began to doubt her faith in peaceful resolution. Across human space, from Earth to Mars to the asteroid colonies, millions of people came to the same conclusion. They had tried peace. They had followed the rules, filed the proper forms, and trusted in the system. And in return, they had been exploited, suppressed, and murdered. The Galactic Union had forced humanity into this position through 5 years of calculated oppression. They had taken human patience for weakness and human cooperation for submission. They were about to learn the difference between a species that chooses peace and a species that accepts servitude. Humanity was done choosing peace. The secret facility was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. From the outside, it looked like any other mining operation, complete with fake equipment and actual ore shipments to maintain the illusion. Inside, however, humanity was building its last hope for freedom. Kate Sullivan walked through the main research bay, her eyes scanning the dozen prototype weapons arranged on testing platforms. She was an engineer who had designed propulsion systems for colony ships before the Union arrived. Now she designed weapons that could kill alien warships. The transition had been easier than she expected. Dr. Ryan Foster worked at a holographic display, manipulating equations that described quantum probability fields. He was a physicist who had published papers on theoretical applications of quantum mechanics. The Union's own scientists had reviewed his work years ago and dismissed it as interesting, but impractical. That dismissal had been their first mistake. The project was called Valkyrie, named after the warriors of Old Norse mythology who decided which soldiers lived and which died in battle. Earth's government had authorized it 6 months after the Europa massacre, diverting resources from a dozen civilian programs to fund weapons research. The facility employed 300 scientists and engineers, all working under conditions of absolute secrecy. Kate's team had made their first breakthrough 3 months into the project. Union shields worked by generating a field that dispersed energy weapons and deflected physical projectiles. The technology was ancient and refined over thousands of years. Human scientists had studied captured Union shield generators and found them nearly perfect in design. But Ryan had approached the problem differently. Instead of trying to penetrate the shields with more power, he found a way to make the shields ignore the weapon entirely. His quantum disruptor warheads existed in a probability state until the moment of impact. Union sensors could not detect them because they were technically not there until they needed to be. The shields could not stop them because by the time the shields registered a threat, the warhead had already passed through. The first test had been conducted against a captured Union shield generator. Kate had fired the prototype missile from 100 kilometers away. The Union shield had activated as designed, its energy field glowing bright blue as it prepared to intercept the incoming threat. The missile had passed through the field as if it was not there, and destroyed the generator in a brilliant flash of light. Ryan had laughed until tears ran down his face. The Union had been so confident in their technology that they had stopped innovating centuries ago. Humanity, desperate and inferior in every conventional measure, had found the gap in their defenses within months. The second breakthrough came from a team led by engineer Alex Chen. He had been working on stealth technology, trying to hide human ships from Union sensors. The challenge was that Union detection systems operated across multiple spectrums simultaneously. Hiding from one type of sensor was easy. Hiding from all of them at once seemed impossible. Alex solved it by accident while testing a faulty power coupling. The malfunction created an interference pattern that scrambled sensor readings within a localized field. Instead of hiding the ship, the field made sensors report false information. Union systems would see empty space where a ship actually was, or see a ship where only empty space existed. The stealth field generators were smaller than expected, compact enough to fit on fighters and missiles. Kate immediately saw the tactical applications. Human ships could approach Union fleets undetected, strike from unexpected angles, and disappear before the enemy could respond. The third innovation came from neuroscientist Dr. Sophie Price. She had been studying human reaction times, compared to Union species, and found something interesting. Humans were not faster in absolute terms, but they were more adaptable. The Union relied heavily on artificial intelligence to control their ships during combat. The AI was sophisticated and efficient, but it operated within programmed parameters. Sophie developed a neural interface that allowed human pilots to control their ships through direct thought. The system was dangerous and difficult to master. Early test pilots experienced severe headaches and disorientation. 2 had suffered seizures. But those who adapted to the interface could fly with a creativity and unpredictability that no AI could match. Kate watched as pilot volunteers trained in simulators, their ships dancing through virtual battlefields with impossible grace. The neural interface allowed them to react instantly to threats, to make split-second decisions based on intuition rather than calculation. Against Union AI, this human element would be the edge that made victory possible. While the weapons were being developed, Colonel Gary Hayes was building the force that would use them. His resistance network had grown from a few dozen cells to a coordinated movement, spanning every human world. Former military officers trained civilians in combat tactics. Engineers learned to sabotage Union equipment. Intelligence operatives gathered information on Union fleet movements and facility locations. Gary operated from a hidden base on one of Saturn's moons, coordinating operations through encrypted channels. His organization had infiltrated Union administrative offices, bribed corrupt Union officials for information, and even recruited a few alien sympathizers who disagreed with Union policies. The network was ready to strike, waiting only for the weapons that would give them a chance. Admiral Jake Morrison had been recalled from retirement to command the new fleet. He had watched humanity surrender its freedom 5 years ago and had felt helpless to prevent it. Now he spent his days in secret training facilities, teaching young pilots how to fight an enemy that outnumbered them 100 to 1. Jake's strategy was built on mobility and surprise. Human ships could not win a direct confrontation with Union battle fleets. They did not have the numbers or the firepower for conventional warfare, but with quantum disruptors, stealth fields, and neural interfaces, they could fight differently. They could strike fast, hit hard, and vanish before the Union could respond. The fleet being assembled was small by Union standards. 60 warships built in hidden shipyards throughout the solar system. Each one was equipped with the new technologies and crewed by volunteers who understood they might not survive the coming war. Jake knew every captain by name, had trained many of them personally, and would grieve for each one who fell. Dr. Emma Hayes had finally abandoned her faith in diplomacy. She had spent months trying to arrange a meeting with Union leadership to discuss the Europa tragedy and treaty revisions. Her requests were ignored, her messages unanswered. When she finally managed to reach a mid-level Union administrator, she was told that human concerns would be addressed in due time, which everyone understood meant never. Emma had joined her father's resistance network, though not as a soldier. She coordinated civilian evacuations and medical supplies, preparing for the humanitarian crisis that war would bring. Her xenobiology expertise was redirected toward understanding Union physiology, identifying weaknesses that human weapons could exploit. The turning point came when Union inspectors discovered evidence of Project Valkyrie. A supply ship had been intercepted carrying components that could only be used for military applications. Union intelligence traced the shipment back to the asteroid facility. Vrix himself delivered the ultimatum to Earth's United Council. The Union demands immediate access to all human research facilities. Any military projects must be shut down immediately. All personnel involved in unauthorized weapons development must be surrendered to Union authority for trial. You have 24 hours to comply. The council chamber was silent as the aliens' words were translated. Every representative understood what compliance meant. It meant surrendering humanity's only hope of resistance. It meant accepting permanent subjugation. It meant betraying everyone who had worked on Valkyrie, everyone who had died on Europa, everyone who still believed humanity deserved freedom. The vote was unanimous. Earth's Council refused the Union's demands. They issued a statement declaring that humanity would no longer accept exploitation, disguised as cooperation. They demanded renegotiation of the original treaty under terms of equality. They called for the Union to recognize human sovereignty and withdraw their occupation forces. Brix's response was predictable. The Galactic Union does not negotiate with rebellious species. You will comply or face the consequences. His transmission ended, and Union ships throughout human space began moving into attack positions. Kate Sullivan received the alert in her asteroid facility. She looked at her team, at the weapons they had built, at the hope they had forged from desperation and ingenuity. This is it. Activate all production lines. Get every missile, every generator, every interface we have ready for deployment. We are out of time. Ryan Foster checked his calculations one final time, then authorized the release of technical specifications to human shipyards. Within hours, factories across the solar system began manufacturing quantum disruptors. The design was elegant and simple enough for rapid production. Humanity would have thousands of the weapons within days. Alex Chen transmitted stealth field schematics to Admiral Morrison's fleet. Installation teams were already standing by, ready to retrofit every human warship with the new technology. The galaxy had never seen ships that could vanish from sensors while maintaining full combat capability. The Union was about to learn what human innovation could achieve when survival was at stake. Colonel Gary Hayes activated his entire network. Resistance cells received orders to prepare for coordinated strikes against Union facilities. Intelligence gathered over years of patient observation was distributed to combat units. Saboteurs moved into position. The hidden war was about to become very visible. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as his fleet assembled. 60 ships against the might of the Galactic Union. It should have been hopeless. By every logical calculation, humanity was about to be crushed. But Jake had learned something during his years in space. Logic was not the only force that mattered in war. Courage counted, determination counted, and the willingness to pay any price for freedom counted most of all. The Union fleet would arrive within days. They would expect humanity to surrender or to mount a desperate, futile defense. They would be wrong on both counts. Humanity had tried peace and been answered with oppression. Now they would try something the Galactic Union had not faced in thousands of years. They would try war, fought by a species that had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within days, 3 species that had suffered under Union rule for centuries began their own rebellions. The Talvek, who had been crushed once before, rose again with renewed hope. The Minari resistance fighters emerged from hiding after years of guerrilla warfare. Even the peaceful Dendron began refusing Union orders, their patience finally exhausted. The Galactic Union faced a crisis unlike anything in its 10,000-year history. For millennia, their power had been absolute and unquestioned. Now a species they had dismissed as primitive had shattered that image of invincibility. Union leadership convened emergency sessions, arguing over how to respond. Some demanded overwhelming retaliation to restore fear. Others counseled caution, warning that humanity had proven more dangerous than anticipated. Brix watched these debates with growing unease. He had been the one to bring humanity into the Union, had assured the Council that humans would be easily controlled. Their rebellion was a direct challenge to his judgment and his authority. He pushed for maximum force, calling for a fleet of 2,000 warships to crush human resistance once and for all. The fleet began assembling at Union staging points, drawing ships from across the galaxy. War Marshal Kreth had been stripped of his command after his defeat, replaced by Marshal Voren, a cold and calculating strategist who had never lost a battle. Voren studied everything known about human tactics and weapons, looking for weaknesses to exploit. He would not underestimate them as Kreth had done. Admiral Jake Morrison knew the Union would return in force. He used the brief respite to expand and strengthen the human fleet. Shipyards worked around the clock, building new vessels equipped with quantum disruptors and stealth fields. Kate Sullivan's team refined their weapons, making them more powerful and easier to manufacture. Training programs pushed new pilots through accelerated courses, preparing them for the battles ahead. But Jake also understood that defensive warfare would eventually fail. The Union had too many resources, too many ships, too many soldiers. Humanity could win individual battles but would lose a war of attrition. They needed to change the equation entirely, to strike at the Union's ability to wage war rather than just fighting their fleets. Dr. Lisa Warren provided the intelligence that made such a strategy possible. Her stolen data included the locations of major Union logistics centers, the facilities that supplied and maintained their vast military machine. If humanity could destroy or capture these facilities, they could cripple Union operations across entire sectors. Jake called a meeting of his senior commanders to present the plan. It was bold to the point of recklessness. Instead of defending human space, they would launch simultaneous attacks on 12 Union facilities scattered across 6 star systems. The strike forces would be small and lightly armed, relying on speed and surprise rather than firepower. Many would not return. Commander Danny Pierce volunteered to lead one of the strike forces immediately. He had survived the first battle and learned valuable lessons about Union tactics. His target was a communications relay station that coordinated Union fleet movements across a quarter of the galaxy. Destroying it would leave hundreds of Union ships operating blind for weeks. Colonel Gary Hayes took command of ground operations, selecting targets where human forces could do the most damage with the least risk. His resistance network had grown into a proper military force, trained and equipped for offensive operations. They would hit Union supply depots and manufacturing centers, destroying stockpiles of weapons and spare parts. Dr. Emma Hayes worked with intelligence teams to identify which Union facilities were most critical. Her xenobiology expertise helped assess which species might be sympathetic to human cause and which were most loyal to Union authority. The attacks needed to be precise, targeting Union military infrastructure while avoiding unnecessary civilian casualties. The operation launched 3 weeks. After the Battle of Seoul, human strike forces emerged from faster-than-light travel at their targets simultaneously, catching Union defenders completely off guard. Danny's team hit the communications relay with quantum disruptors, destroying the main transmitters before the station could even call for help. Within minutes, a facility that had operated for 500 years was reduced to drifting wreckage. Similar strikes succeeded across Union space. Supply depots exploded. Manufacturing centers went dark. Command posts were overrun by human ground forces who appeared without warning, fought with terrifying efficiency, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The Union's vast military machine began to stagger as critical components were systematically destroyed. Marshal Voron's fleet was still assembling when the attacks hit. His carefully planned invasion suddenly faced a crisis of logistics. Ships could not be supplied. Communications between fleet elements became unreliable. Intelligence reports arrived hours later, not at all. The mighty Union military was discovering that all their advanced technology meant nothing when the infrastructure supporting it was in flames. Voron was forced to split his fleet, sending portions to defend critical facilities while others continued toward human space. This division weakened his main assault force exactly as Jake had intended. The Union was now fighting on dozens of fronts simultaneously, their attention scattered and their forces divided. The main battle came 6 weeks after the first human victory. Voron arrived at Earth with 800 warships, still a massive force but far smaller than the 2,000 he had planned to bring. Human defenders numbered just over 100 ships, but they held position in a carefully prepared defensive zone filled with automated weapons platforms and minefields. The battle was brutal and desperate. Union ships pushed forward in waves, accepting heavy losses to close with the human fleet. Human vessels fought with everything they had, their quantum disruptors and stealth fields giving them advantages that barely compensated for the enemy's superior numbers. The space around Earth became a graveyard of shattered ships from both sides. Commander Danny Pierce returned from his strike mission to join the defense. His ship was damaged and his crew exhausted, but they threw themselves back into combat without hesitation. Danny led his squadron in a suicidal run against Voron's flagship, knowing that killing the Union commander might break the enemy's coordination. His neural interface showed him the impossible path through enemy fire. He wove between laser beams and missiles, his reflexes pushed beyond human limits by the connection to his ship. 3 of his squadron died in the first 30 seconds. 5 more fell as they closed on the flagship. Danny and the 2 remaining pilots launched everything they had at point-blank range. The flagship's shields flickered and failed under the concentrated assault. Quantum disruptors tore through its hull, detonating deep inside the vessel. Marshal Voron died without even realizing his flagship was doomed. The massive ship broke apart, its pieces tumbling through space like a metal meteor shower. Danny did not survive to see his victory. A Union fighter caught his damaged ship as he tried to pull away. The explosion was quick and bright, another light going out among thousands. Admiral Morrison watched from his command ship and felt the loss deeply, but there was no time to grieve. The battle was still raging. The destruction of Voron's flagship did exactly what Jake had hoped. Union ships began to falter without their commander's guidance. Their AI systems tried to coordinate, but they lacked the flexibility to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. Human captains exploited every moment of confusion, pressing attacks wherever the enemy showed weakness. After 8 hours of continuous combat, the Union fleet broke. They had lost over half their ships and their command structure was in chaos. The remaining vessels retreated, leaving Earth's orbit filled with wreckage and the bodies of thousands. Humanity had won again, but the cost had been terrible. 47 human ships destroyed, thousands of soldiers and crew dead, including heroes like Danny Pierce. Kate Sullivan worked through her grief by building more weapons. Every quantum disruptor she produced was a memorial to the fallen, a promise that their sacrifice would not be wasted. The galaxy was learning to fear human technology, and she would make sure that fear was justified. Across Union space, the rebellions grew stronger. The Talvek now fought openly, using tactics learned from observing human operations. The Minari coordinated with human forces, sharing intelligence and mounting joint operations. The Dendron, despite their peaceful nature, began refusing to supply Union military efforts, bringing entire sectors to a standstill. The Galactic Union's authority was crumbling. Species that had accepted Union rule for millennia were suddenly questioning whether they needed the Union at all. Trade networks broke down as worlds refused to accept Union currency. Colonial governors found themselves ignored by populations that no longer feared enforcement. Vrix made one final attempt to salvage the situation. He contacted Earth directly, requesting negotiations. The arrogance that had colored his first meeting with humanity was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect or might have been fear. Dr. Emma Hayes led the human delegation, accompanied by Admiral Morrison and Colonel Hayes. The negotiations took place on a neutral space station. Vrix arrived with a much smaller entourage than before, his body language suggesting defeat even before talks began. Emma presented humanity's demands clearly and without compromise. The original treaty was void. Humanity would be recognized as a fully sovereign power with equal status to any Union species. All Union forces would withdraw from human space immediately. Reparations would be paid for damages inflicted during the occupation. Vrix tried to negotiate softer terms but found no flexibility in the human position. They had proven their ability to fight and their willingness to die for freedom. The Union could continue the war, but it would cost thousands more ships and might trigger complete collapse of Union authority across the galaxy. He had no choice but to accept. The treaty that emerged recognized not just human sovereignty, but established protections for all species against exploitation. Emma insisted on including clauses that would prevent the Union from using treaties as tools of subjugation ever again. Other species that had rebelled were granted similar terms, their freedom purchased by human blood and human courage. 5 years after the treaty was signed, Kate Sullivan stood in a shipyard watching the construction of humanity's newest carrier. The vessel was massive and powerful, equipped with weapons that made Union military planners nervous. Human technology had advanced dramatically during the war years, and humanity showed no signs of slowing down. Colonel Gary Hayes, now a general, oversaw training programs that taught allied species human tactical doctrine. The Talvek proved particularly adept students, their own experiences with oppression making them natural partners. A new alliance was forming, built not on domination but genuine cooperation among equals. Admiral Morrison finally retired for real, satisfied that humanity's freedom was secure. He spent his days writing about the war, ensuring future generations understood the price of liberty. His memoirs became required reading in military academies across human space and beyond. Dr. Emma Hayes reflected on the strange journey her life had taken. She had started as an advocate for peace and ended as an architect of war. But she understood now that there were things worth fighting for, that some evils could not be negotiated away. Peace was not the absence of conflict, but the freedom to live with dignity and self-determination. Dr. Lisa Warren continued her research, now with access to Union databases that had been restricted before. She studied galactic history and found that the Union had followed the same pattern of exploitation for thousands of years. Dozens of species had been subjugated, their potential limited by Union control. Humanity's rebellion had broken that cycle, giving those species hope for their own freedom. Earth stood as a symbol to the galaxy, proof that even the mightiest empire could fall to those who valued freedom over safety. Human ships patrolled their space with pride, ready to defend their hard-won independence. New colonies spread across nearby systems, no longer subject to Union quotas or restrictions. The Galactic Union still existed, but in diminished form. It remained a trading network and diplomatic forum, but its authority to dictate terms to member species was gone. The age of Union dominance had ended, replaced by a more chaotic but ultimately more just arrangement of sovereign powers. Humanity had tried peace. The Galactic Union had forced them to conflict, and in the fires of that conflict, humanity had forged not just their own freedom, but helped liberate dozens of other species from oppression. The galaxy would never again underestimate the species from Earth, the humans who chose to fight rather than accept chains, who paid the price of freedom in blood and never regretted it.